Well, we just barely avoided a new global tax from the United Nations, and we're going to look at what Donald Trump had to say about that and what's really going on behind this global tax the UN was attempting to do. So let's dive right in. Welcome to Filibustered Headlines. I'm Ryan Howard. As we wrap up our week here, we've got a pretty insane thing that's happening on the global stage, and so I want to dive right into it. And this is a real conversation happening. And there's a lot of countries that are supporting it. And so this title here, it says, UN Shipping Agency delays decision on carbon price under U.S. pressure. So basically the IMO, the International Maritime Organization, that's part of the UN's agency for shipping, they voted to delay by 1 year the decision on a proposed global carbon pricing mechanism for shipping emissions. So in layman's terms, that means, well, depending on how much CO2 is coming out of those ships, taking stuff around the world, they're going to have to pay for that, a global tax. And so, in other words, a way to control the amount of stuff going around the world through climate change. And so this delay came from after intense pressure from the U.S. and also Saudi Arabia. So obviously big oil country. And that's been pushing against what is characterized as a global tax on shipping, like I mentioned. So April 2025, all these nations met and they tentatively agreed on a framework that would require ship owners to pay a CO2 emissions fee. They call it a fee. We know a tax, but that's basically an early form of a carbon levy. And so that is intended to, they say it is intended to encourage cleaner fuel and to fund climate-related projects. We're going to talk about what those climate-related projects just might be. We've got some doozies coming up here. But Trump came out and gave a pretty clear statement on this. And so here we have it. He says, I am outraged that the International Maritime Organization is voting in London this week to pass a global carbon tax. The United States will not stand for this global green new scam tax on shipping, and it will not adhere to it in any way, shape, or form. We will not tolerate increased prices on American consumers or the creation of a green new scam bureaucracy to spend your money on their green dreams. Stand with the United States and vote no in London tomorrow. Well, they did vote no by and large, but there was almost 50 countries that voted that they did not want to delay that. They wanted it to go forward. And that included China. Shockingly, we know China is a wonderful proponent of green and healthy air and all of that, and except they're not at all. But they are supporting the things globally and calling on others to do the same. And so we see there them prioritizing what they want to say to the public a little bit differently than what they are doing over in their country, and also what they're supporting in other countries as well, actually with their actions. So the question though, that suspended the vote. So that's great news. But it was blocked. And so I'm going to talk about something that the Biden administration was doing with the WHO that actually was going the wrong direction, but thankfully we got that avoided. And so as that's going forward or not going forward, that vote was suspended. And I've got a few other details I want to get into here, but it's clear that a line has been drawn in the sand between sovereignty, nation sovereignty for each individual nation state, or what we call globalism. And so we do not want a one world government. We do not want one global operating function for regulation, whether it's related to health or transportation or really anything, or taxation. You guys got to let me know in the comments what you think. But let's see. Now, the UN, they've always, one of these things as we kind of look at, we want to look at what's really going on here, because there's some obvious things, and there are those that actually think that this is related to adjusting the climate and actually thinking about whether or not humans are impacting the climate. And we can go back decades, even almost a century, I believe, and see what they've been saying about what's going to happen with their predictions. And those have not come to fruition, and they just move the goalposts. And so there's no shock there. That's nothing new. But what is the real goal with talking about climate change? I mean, is it really carbon dioxide is the enemy? Is that really what's going on here? Or is there perhaps something else a little more sinister? Well, the UN has always depended on member dues that's voluntary, and that's funding from rich nations, mostly from the U.S. And so a global tax actually would cut the connection on that, so it would not be so dependent. And so what you would have is a potentially moving toward a self-funding with mandatory international levers and not necessarily beholden to the national oversight or congressional approval like it sees today. And so this is really self-financing world government. That's kind of like the idea. Doug had come up with that. And I think that's a good way to think about it, and not having to be reliant on tax-paying nations or whatever coming in to do that. Now, I want to talk about some other, what I really think is going on here. And really, it's ultimately about control. Now, I want to give an example here. I'm going to talk about what these real climate projects are. But first, I want to give an example of what China did. Now, during COVID, they put out this, as we know, it originated in a lab in China, although that was rejected by the mainstream media, but it was proved to be true. And Trump criticized them for that. Well, they came up with an app to help track health of its citizens. And they actually had to take their phone, scan it to get into their own apartment or their own home. And if it was red, they don't get in because they might have said, well, you went to this they went to this place and there was suspected coronavirus there, so they can't get into their home. And then there's a big population of homelessness growing in China, which is absolute insanity. But by the way, if someone jaywalks in China, they have one camera for every 2 citizens there. One camera for every 2 citizens. You know how many people are in China? It is billions. And so what we see is that that camera can then go and say a person jaywalks, then that camera recognizes that person, actually can recognize it from their silhouette of the way they walk, or even if they're wearing a mask, just from the eyes, and can go and find their account. That's all connected, and actually just take that fine out for the jaywalking before they even get home and don't get into their own house because of the app. That is what we call communism. And that is not what we want. That is where the government has way more control than God intended. And that is not what we want. And so that is where it is going. And what I want to point out is China had this app, and lo and behold, Chinese city plans to turn coronavirus app into a permanent health tracker. Well, look at that, knowing where the person is at all times. And this was from 2020. So this is old news. So we already knew this, but this was just the beginning. And so that was in May of 2020 when this all began. And so look at what you think they're doing now. And so this is where this is going. So now it starts out as a carbon tax. Okay. And then it turns out, oh, well, can't pay that. Okay. Well, then here's some credits. Okay. Can't pay. Okay. Not going to work. Okay. Well, then can't send that shipment. And then it's a mechanism to potentially bankrupt companies, or maybe make those companies being taken over by the state, or all kinds of different things that are just additional mechanisms to get control, to get more control. And that is what is just absolutely infuriating about this. And that people cannot see this for what it is. Now, I want to go a little bit. I'm going to talk to you about some of those exciting climate-related projects that you're just going to love. But before then, I want to talk about, I did an interview on my podcast, Cutting Edge Faith, with Steve King. Now, he was a former U.S. representative from the state of Iowa. And in this interview, about 2/3 the way through, we start talking about what was going on with the Biden administration. And this was a couple years ago when Biden was still in office. And I was talking to him about another climate initiative that was happening in the Midwest, which is the CO2 pipelines. You heard that right. So it is a pipeline that they are putting underground, that they're going to capture CO2 coming from ethanol plants or whatever, or the air, and then liquefy it and put it under the ground. Not dangerous at all, actually very explosive and highly dangerous. And they're using eminent domain, where the government is partnering with private companies to steal farmland using eminent domain for other companies to go ahead and install this and do these tests and ruin that land, take it over, and then use it for their private benefit. And they're all doing it under the guise of helping with climate change. And so they're going to put this liquefied CO2 in the ground and figure out what to do with it later. But it turns out there's other profit mechanisms that they have already in mind for that. So that's one of these wonderful initiatives that they're thinking about doing. Well, that one is actually already happening. But in this interview, we also talked about what the Biden administration did. And what they did was they went over to the WHO, and they spent, they sent a delegation there, and they proposed over 300 amendments that were related to health and giving up sovereignty of the United States. But the Biden administration didn't propose them themselves. They gave them to other countries, smaller countries, to get their buy-in and get them to propose it. So then there was also this plausible deniability. Well, at that time, it all went through, and it was actually a treaty, but they didn't call it a treaty because then they would have had to have representatives from the Congress there, from the Senate, from the U.S. And so they moved forward with it. I think, thankfully, that was stopped, and that did not go, over the next year, that did not get ratified. And so dodged that one. But we know who is controlling a lot of what's happening with the WHO. Well, we see that name, China, coming up again. Now, I would encourage you to watch that interview. He's done a lot of speaking about that topic. And he's been talking about it since early 2000s. And so he's really was ahead of the curve there. Now, the final thing I want to go into here is I want to talk about some of these climate projects that we're talking about. Now, if this had gone through, this would have been the first ever global fee that was imposed on greenhouse gas emissions. And so they call this planet warming greenhouse gas emissions, but there's lots of factors that go into that. And it's like having a stadium of 10,000 people, and then you have, or 100,000 people, and you have 4 people in that stadium influencing everything. That's the idea of the amount of CO2 gas in the atmosphere and what actually is happening with all the other gases and everything in the atmosphere, all the other elements there. But let's talk about some of these climate initiatives. These are wonderful. These are the 5 most outlandish ideas to fight climate change. Now, I don't know. We could probably debate whether these are the most outlandish or not. But let's go ahead and dive in here. So the first one is mechanical trees. Now, I want to be clear. I support taking care of our environment. I support planting trees. I support having deforestation or reforestation, where you're actually not just removing the trees, but you're adding new trees, and you're doing it in a way that keeps the forest healthy. That's something that California has not done, which is why they have a lot of the fires that they have. And so there has to be forest management. And so, but mechanical trees, that's one of the solutions that they offer. Let's see another one here. Building underwater walls to block glaciers. So maybe that would help save the Titanic. I don't know. I don't mean to make light of that, but we know lots of conspiracies around there. But let's see another one here. Dimming the sun. That's a real one. That's not just a Simpsons episode. So there's actually several ways that we've seen that. A large mechanical thing, dimming the sun. I think that one was from The Simpsons. But actually, they're talking about putting things in the atmosphere in order to dim the sun. And so it's just absolute insanity. But yes, real research going on at legit universities. Insane. Spraying Arctic ice with glass, a thin layer of hollow glass microspheres to help just right on top of that to help reflect the sun's radiation. So, not great ways of getting integrated here. And ultra white cooling paint. So they're just kind of trying to take things into their own hands here. Well, that's not everything. There's others, like I mentioned. There's stratospheric aerosol injections and that sort of thing, where there actually is, you could call it cloud seeding. And you see these unnatural cloud formations. And those are the things that are happening. And obviously there's lots of these elements being put into the atmosphere. And this is really, it's proven, because they find elements that are not actually found isolated in the atmosphere naturally. So that means somebody had to put them there. And so this geoengineering, as it's called. And so this is infuriating. We see what's really going on here. We see what they're trying to do is make it so that they can have more mechanisms for control. And we need to vote this down. We need to say, no, we cannot let this happen. We can't let this continue. We need to stay tuned into what's going on so that we don't get the rug pulled from underneath us. And so we need to make sure that we know. I've seen even this at state level versions. There was the Democrats in Iowa brought something to the floor, which was like an Iowa version of the Paris Climate Accord. And so if you remember the Paris Climate Accord, that was an absolute garbage. But Trump removed us from that. I think he did it twice, because I think we tried to get back in with Biden and all that. But we need to know what's really going on here with climate change. Obviously this is going towards, and all these mechanisms are in place where they can have not only tracking of CO2 on these shipping containers and ships going around the world, but also on individuals as well, and tracking in the cars. And hey, somebody had too many carbon emissions last month. Either they can pay to get more carbon emissions, or maybe they just can't drive until the next month. And then that's where you get into where you can't travel between cities. Maybe you can only fly so often. You can only do all of these mechanisms of control and absolute insanity. So we need to say no, hard pass on all of that. So what do you think? Let me know in the comments. Are we heading in the right direction here? Did we avoid something here? What do you think is really going on behind the scenes here? So, well, thank you for joining me. We're going to have some more episodes coming out soon, and make sure you come back next week. We will be back live with Filibustered Headlines Live. And until then, I hope you have a great weekend. God bless. I'm Ryan Howard, and we will see you next time.
Gold is not just a backup plan if the world falls apart. It's an investment opportunity that could set you up for generations. There's never really a bad time to invest in gold, but you want to make sure you have the right guide. And that is where Genesis Gold Group shines. Whether you are a first-time buyer or a seasoned investor, their trusted expertise and competitive pricing makes them an easy choice. They offer tangible assets in case of emergencies, but they can also design the perfect IRA just for you. And they'll even cut through all that confusing red tape from the IRS. We at Filibustered love the genius design of the Prepper Bar, which breaks up into sections like a chocolate bar. But if you prefer a more high-security insured gold storage, they have that too. And unlike Fort Knox, the gold is actually there and 100% owned by you. Genesis Gold Group is a safe, simple, and convenient way to invest. Visit filibustedgold.com today for your free investment guide from Genesis Gold Group.